So let's get right into it. When you hear about these huge financial scandals, like Enron or the 2008 crisis, do you ever wonder if they're just one-off crimes, or are they actually something more? Could they be symptoms of a much bigger pattern, a weakness built right into the DNA of our modern financial world? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today.
And this quote right here, it absolutely nails it. See, the biggest frauds of our time aren't just bugs in the system. You could almost say they're features. They are the natural result of a global financial system that was built for one thing above all else: speed. The lightning-fast, borderless movement of money. And as we're about to see, that design created the perfect storm for deception on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this modern, anything-goes world of finance, we've got to go back in time. We need to look at the system it replaced. A world that wasn't about open highways for money, but one with high walls and locked gates. A financial fortress, really, built from the rubble of World War II.
Now, the mindset back then was a whole different universe. Picture this. It's 1944. Leaders from 44 countries get together at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, and they are completely haunted by the chaos of the Great Depression and the currency wars that helped start World War II. So their goal wasn't growth at all costs. No way. It was to build a cage, a strong one, to contain the wild, destructive power of finance.
So how'd they build this cage? Well, it stood on three really powerful pillars. First, you had the gold standard. This meant exchange rates were stable and predictable, no crazy currency swings. Second, and this is a big one, capital controls. This gave governments the power to just slam the door shut on speculative money trying to rush in or out of their country. And third, they set up new global watchdogs, the IMF and the World Bank, to make sure everyone played by the rules. It was a world of financial containment, plain and simple.
But that fortress, as stable and predictable as it was, well, it wasn't built to last forever. By the time we get to the 1970s and 80s, these two massive forces, one based on ideas, the other on technology, they just started tearing down the walls, brick by brick.
It was this perfect one-two punch. On one hand, you had a political revolution. Leaders like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher came in with this new gospel, that markets, not governments, knew best. And that led to what was basically a bonfire of the old financial rules. At the very same time, you've got this tech revolution, computers, telecom, suddenly making it possible to zap money anywhere on Earth instantly. So the political desire to free up capital met the technological power to actually do it.
And this created a really dangerous new problem called moral hazard. The American savings and loan crisis is the textbook case. The government deregulated the S&Ls, letting them make all sorts of risky bets, but, and here's the catch, they kept insuring all their deposits. So the owners could gamble with taxpayer money. If they won, they kept the profits. And if they lost, well, you and I, the public, picked up the tab. It was the perfect heads I win, tails you lose setup.
And this is the absolute key to this whole era. All of a sudden, finance is moving at the speed of light. But the regulators, the cops on the beat, they're still stuck in the analog age. And this huge gap between innovation and oversight, it created this brand new kind of lawless frontier that was just begging to be exploited.
So the fortress walls are down. Who do you think is the first to come pouring through those gaps? You guessed it, the criminals. This new, wide-open, unregulated space opened the door for frauds on a scale that would have been literally impossible just a decade before.
And two scandals from this period really tell the story perfectly. First, you have BCCI. They used something called regulatory arbitrage, which is just a fancy way of saying they played an international game of hide-and-seek with different countries' laws, and it led to devastating losses for regular people. And then, of course, came Enron, which used mind-bendingly complex accounting tricks to just flat-out lie about its health, wiping out the life savings of its own employees in the process.
You know, what was so incredible about BCCI wasn't just that it broke the law. Its whole business was breaking the law. It was designed from the very start to be a ghost in the machine. It was this insane spiderweb of companies so complicated that no single country could figure out what was going on. It quickly became the bank of choice for drug cartels, for terrorists, for dictators. It was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first global criminal supermarket.
Enron, though, was different. That was a rot from the inside. They cooked up this maze of shell companies, not really to hide from regulators, but to hide their own massive debts from their investors. And then they did something truly wild. They used an accounting method to pretend that profits they just hoped to make years down the line were actual cash they had in the bank today. I mean, it was pure financial fantasy. And their auditors, Arthur Andersen, they signed off on the whole thing.
The result was just devastating. Over $70 billion in shareholder value just vanished. Poof. Thousands of employees saw their retirement savings, which were mostly in Enron stock, completely wiped out. The public was so outraged, it led directly to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, a huge reform meant to make sure CEOs could never again get away with that kind of deception.
But as huge as those scandals were, the next wave of fraud was, believe it or not, even scarier. Because this time, it wasn't just about crooks finding loopholes in the system. This time, the system itself became the machine that created the fraud.
Yeah, the 2008 crisis was like a multi-layered cake of fraud, a perfect chain of failure. It started right there on the street, with lenders pushing these toxic subprime mortgages on people they knew could never pay them back. Then, Wall Street banks bought up all this junk, bundled into these super complex bonds, and, this is the key, the credit rating agencies stamped them with a AAA rating, the safest you can get. These financial time bombs were then sold to pension funds, to cities, to investors all over the world.
So when those time bombs finally went off, the entire global financial system almost went with them. Millions of people lost their homes. The world fell into the worst recession in 80 years. The response was the Dodd-Frank Act, this gigantic piece of legislation designed to stop the banks from ever holding the world economy hostage like that ever again.
And right as this massive, complicated, systemic crisis is happening, a much simpler fraud gets exposed. Bernie Madoff. I mean, he was running the oldest scam in the book, a classic Ponzi scheme. But he blew it up to an insane scale by wrapping it in this illusion of Wall Street legitimacy. He used his reputation as a former chairman of the NASDAQ to make himself seem like this untouchable exclusive genius. But the simplicity of his scam is what makes the truth so infuriating. This was a catastrophic failure by the watchdogs. The SEC, America's top financial cop, was literally handed proof of the fraud on a silver platter for years by a whistleblower named Harry Markopolos. But for whatever reason, they were either too incompetent and maybe just too intimidated by Madoff to do anything. They never even made the basic phone calls to check if his trades were real, which of course they weren't.
And that brings us right up to today. The same old cycle, innovation, creating new ways to cheat, is still going on. But the battlefield, it's totally different. Now, it's almost entirely digital.
You can think of cryptocurrency as basically a brand new digital toolkit for criminals. The anonymity is their mask. Services called mixers are like a getaway car that keeps changing license plates. And these privacy coins, those are the secret, untraceable escape tunnels. It's like a custom-built ecosystem for financial crime.
So that raises the big question, right? Can we fight fire with fire? Can this new wave of technology, the same one that's creating all these new threats, also give us the solution? Can something like AI finally put us ahead of the criminals?
Well, it turns out it's a classic double-edged sword. On one hand, AI is an incredible shield. Machine learning can spot weird patterns in millions of transactions in a fraction of a second, something no human could ever do. But it's also a powerful sword. Criminals are going to use AI to create scarily realistic deepfake scams, to automate hacking attacks, and to build malware that can learn and adapt on its own. It's a full-blown technological arms race. And that leads us to a really chilling long-term threat. It's a strategy some are calling harvest now, decrypt later. Basically, criminals and even rogue nations are stealing huge amounts of encrypted financial data right now. Today, it's unreadable junk to them, but they're betting that in a few years, a powerful enough quantum computer will exist that can just shatter today's encryption, unlocking all those stolen secrets in an instant. Which leaves us with one last, kinda tough thought to chew on. What if this isn't a problem we can ever solve? What if fraud is just a permanent, inescapable shadow that will always follow financial innovation? If that's true, then the goal can't be to build another fortress that's impossible to breach. Maybe the real goal has to be constant vigilance, the ability to bounce back, and accepting that we're in a perpetual race to stay just one step ahead in a game that's never, ever going to end.